Hi.
Thank you for coming. My name is Kristen LaHoulier, and I'm going to be the facilitator for this event. I am a parent volunteer on the Ad Hoc Strategic Planning Committee, and I'm also a professional facilitator, so I've volunteered to serve in this capacity for these forums. Before we get started in a minute, I'm going to hand it over to Victor to kind of officially, Dr. Mercurio, I'm sorry, to officially welcome you. And before I do that, I want to quickly review the agenda for tonight. After Dr. Mercurio's opening remarks, Carolyn Mark, who is the chair of our strategic, the chair of our school committee, but also our strategic planning committee, is going to give us an overview of the strategic planning process that is currently underway. And then David Osborne, who is a school committee member, and also the Chief of Staff for Excellence for All, which is a project of the National Center on Education and the Economy, is going to talk to us about how Rhode Island school districts fare in comparison to East Greenwich, and how East Greenwich also compares outside of the state. And then we're going to have a discussion from there and really focus in on what academic measures of success would be most meaningful for East Greenwich. So that's the agenda. Let's see if I wanted to say anything else before we moved on. I think that's it. So Victor, you want to take it from here?
My job in opening remarks is to give a brief history of strategic planning organizationally in the Western Hemisphere from 1900 to now. Oh, whoops, wrong meeting, sorry. So I want to echo Kristen's comments and thank you for coming. This process started almost 2 years ago, and we've re-energized and rethought the process, so we're excited to have the opportunity to re-engage not only the ad hoc committee but also the public. So we're excited that you're here with us this evening. I think you're going to find the presentation from Mr. Osborne to be real compelling and a nice catalyst for discussion about where we want to be when we grow up. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen. Thank you again for being here, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Carolyn's going to give us an overview of the strategic planning process, but one thing I wanted to mention is that this forum is one of a series of two. We're focusing tonight on academic measures of success. The subsequent forum will focus on non-academic measures of success, and we'll also be able to hear some benchmarking work that will be done on best practices in other districts at that time. There's also going to be several other opportunities for community input along the way. One is a survey that hopefully you got a notice about this week that came out from the committee. We hope you'll fill that out if you haven't done that yet. I hope you'll encourage other people that you know to fill it out as well. And then also a public hearing towards the end of the process where people will get to see the whole plan all packaged up. And Carolyn will tell you a little bit more about the timeline of that and so forth. So I'll turn it over to you. Do you want your clicker?
If you want to click for me.
I can either way.
What do
Just
I
push the arrow.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. The arrow button is usually the right button.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I just want to say how excited I am to have been able to play a role in helping to get this process re-energized. Some of you may have already heard a fair amount about it. You may have attended school committee meetings or seen some pieces that have been written about kind of where we are in the strategic planning process and where we need to go. But none of this would be possible without the wonderful support from Dr. Mercurio, from district administration, from all of the members that are currently serving on the Strategic Planning Ad Hoc Committee. We have a tremendous amount of work to do in a very aggressive timeline, and none of it would be possible without the dedicated parents, teachers, administrators who are really helping to make this happen. So I'm going to be pretty brief tonight since I don't want to take time away from David's presentation or from the community conversation. But I did want to just talk a little bit about what our thinking is about the strategic planning process and what we're hoping to accomplish. So I just kind of wanted to start out with talking about what this strategic planning process and what our strategic plan, which I'm calling our Vision 2020. I'm not sure if it's actually caught on yet. But this was partly a reflection of the fact that we did start the strategic planning process in 2013, and for a variety of reasons, we're not able to complete the process as quickly as we had liked. And so 5 years, we're looking to create a 5-year strategic plan. Starting in 2013, that would have been 2018. Since it's 2015 when we are re-energizing this process, I think 2020 is a realistic time horizon to be looking at. But there are certain things that this strategic planning process is going to do, and there are certain things that this process is not going to do. And so I just kind of wanted to do a little bit of expectation setting about what exactly it is that we're hoping to do between now and the fall. So, so really what we're working to do here is create a shared vision for where we are and where we want to go as a school district. We want to develop consensus around what our strategic priorities are as a district. There are a lot of things that are important for any school district to work on, but there are some things that districts are doing well and some things that districts are not doing so well on, or where there are opportunities for improvement. So this strategic plan is not going to be a blueprint for all of the things that we need to be working on. It's really going to be what those strategic priorities are for us after having really assessed what our strengths and weaknesses are as a district, and where, if we invest our energy in these certain limited areas, we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of what we're all hoping to create for ourselves as a district. The goal is that the plan will articulate what our vision is as a district, as well as articulate a purpose statement. What is our reason for being as a school district? We're looking to capture an overarching educational philosophy. And we want that educational philosophy to be something that's evidence-based, not something that we just kind of pulled out of the sky that we thought sounded good, but that really is very much connected to what research shows are the best strategies for how kids learn. It's going to include objectives that attach to those strategic priorities. So if these are our 3 to 5 strategic priorities as a district, what are the objectives under each of those strategic priorities that will help us to accomplish those things? And very importantly, what are the outcomes that we're looking to create? And that's really why we wanted these public forums to be focused on outcomes measures, because ultimately we need to have a shared sense of how we're going to evaluate ourselves as a district. Because if we don't agree on where we're trying to go, it's going to be hard to have a shared sense of how we're going to get there, because we don't know where we're going. So, so desired outcomes, both in terms of academic metrics, but also what are the non-academic metrics that we want to be looking at, because we know that our kids are a lot more than test scores. We know that they're a lot more than how they might perform in a particular classroom. These are kids that we're preparing to be citizens in the world, and we want them to be happy and healthy and productive. And there's lots of different ways of defining those outcomes, and we want to have your input in that. What this strategic plan will not do is it will not detail at the building level all of the building level strategies and tactics that are going to be necessary to achieve those strategic priorities, or to address those strategic priorities. There is work that has already been happening at the building level, some very impressive strategic planning work at the building level. And we are ultimately looking to align that work with our strategic priorities. But we want people to understand that this is going to be a district-wide strategic plan. We're looking for a 10 to 15 page document. We're not looking to write a 50-page novel here. It's not going to be able to include the level of detail I think ultimately everybody would like to see, so we kind of know how each of our buildings are connecting up to our overall plan. But that's work that has been ongoing and will continue to go on in the fall. But we very much are looking to specify the strategic priorities and all of these other things that I've stated on a district-wide basis. The way we're envisioning this process is we want it to be led by our educational leaders, our teachers, our faculty, our district administration. They are professional educators. We work very hard as a district to get the best and brightest. We have fabulous people in this district who know a lot about where we are and where we need to go. And so I'm not going to go into the details about how district administration are playing a role in this process, because we're really going to be kind of focused on the community input part. But we're looking for this process to essentially be led by educational leaders in terms of the content of the strategic plan, supported by the ad hoc committee. The ad hoc committee is going to be there to do a lot of the groundwork. They helped provide feedback to the community survey. There's a whole variety of roles that the ad hoc committee is going to play. They're going to help reflect back to district administration what district administration has generated in terms of draft priorities, draft objectives, and things like that. So they have a really important role to play in supporting the development of the plan. And this is a plan that has to be informed by community input. I mean, at the end of the day, if we've done, I mean, the most important thing that we need, I think, as a community is to really have a shared plan, a shared vision, to get as many of us on the same page about where we're going and how we're going to get there as possible. And in my view, the only way you do that is by getting community input. And so as Kristen said, there are several different ways that we're looking to garner that input, and I'm going to go into some more detail, I think, on the next slide. Ultimately, the strategic plan needs to be approved by the school committee. The school committee will be kept abreast of the progress of the development of the plan over time. The school committee will have opportunities for input themselves as the process goes on, and ultimately it is the school committee that puts a gavel down on the plan. If anybody has any questions at any point, let me know. So in terms of the community input opportunities, as Kristen mentioned, the community survey has gone out to everybody. I'm assuming everybody in this room has already completed their survey. I would expect there was probably a pretty high percentage of folks who have. We've set a deadline of May 11th because we wanted to have a couple of opportunities to put it out on the district listserv. We're looking for parents, teachers, community members, students, everybody who is connected, who's a stakeholder in this process, to complete the survey. So even if you've done it yourself, if you haven't had your children do it yet, then please have them do that. Tonight is the forum on academic metrics. We will be scheduling shortly another community forum on non-academic metrics. We're throwing around a couple of dates to kind of mid-late May. So I look for that. The ad hoc committee meeting. So there was a formal process for appointing members to the ad hoc committee, but I just want to make sure that everybody's clear that any ad hoc committee meeting is open to the public. And if you want to, and they are posted, so if you are interested in coming and sitting in, being a fly on the wall, if you have something that you'd really like to interject, there's an opportunity to do that. So you would not necessarily be a part of any decision-making process that the ad hoc committee itself would be doing, but as a member of the public, you are welcome to be there. And so please know that there's that opportunity as well. Once a draft strategic plan is put together, it will be formally presented to the school committee. We will have a public hearing on it. There'll be opportunity for comment. The ad hoc committee and district administration will work to incorporate any additional feedback that we might get on the plan. We're looking to either in the second meeting in September or possibly the first meeting in October, depending on how much feedback we get. We're looking to have the school committee adopt the plan. At any time throughout any of this, and not just with respect to strategic planning, but on any issue, if anybody ever feels like they want to reach out directly to school committee members, our contact information is on the school district website, and you are certainly welcome to do that as well. So I think this is my last slide. I wanted to kind of go through the strategic planning timeline a little bit. As Dr. Mercurio said, we did start this process quite some time ago. But it's not like nothing's happened since then. There was actually a lot of very good work that happened on the part of the ad hoc committee. A SWOT analysis was conducted, and we have the benefit in re-jumpstarting this process of having the work that's already been done. And as I mentioned, district administration and faculty at the building level have already begun the work regarding developing strategies and tactics. Again, their job will be to make sure at the end of the day what they've developed at the building level aligns with the district-wide strategic plan. We're in the month of April. The ad hoc committee reconvened. The community survey is out there in the world. We're holding our forum. We'll hold another forum in May. At the same time, district administration is working to draft some strategic priorities as well as educational philosophy, and we're hoping by the second meeting of the school committee in the month of May to at least have a preliminary report as to the results of the community survey. In June, district administration will be conducting a half-day retreat. There's going to be lots of work to be done to review and revise the draft priorities, the objectives, the performance metrics. All of this information will be informed by all of those community input opportunities that I discussed before. And then the ad hoc committee leadership and district administration will be working over the summer to actually craft the plan. And then we're looking to be able to share that draft with the rest of the educational leadership in the district, as well as with the ad hoc committee, before it gets presented to the school committee in September for a first read, a public hearing, and then, as I said, approval by the end of September, end of October. So, like I said, it's a very aggressive timeline, which is part of the reason why I just wanted everybody to be clear about what it was that we are looking to include in the plan and what work will continue as we go into the fall. And as aggressive as this is, though, we do think it's a doable plan. I personally think it's essential that we complete this plan by the beginning of the next school year, because this strategic plan will help to inform many of the decisions that the school committee is going to need to make going into next year, and particularly going into the next budget cycle. So it's aggressive. I think we can do it. There's no way we could do it without the support of the community and the volunteers that are working on it. So again, thank you for being here tonight, and I'll turn it back to Kristen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are going to move into the main part of our agenda tonight. And we thought it would be really helpful to kind of anchor our discussion in some data. And throughout all of the work that the Strategic Planning Committee has been doing, one of the first things that they're asking is what information, what data is available to us that will help inform. So how can we compare ourselves, what best practices are out there that we can learn from. And so David Osborne, our illustrious school committee member, but also, as I mentioned before, the Chief of Staff for the Excellence for All project, which is a project of the National Center on Education and the Economy. Did I get that right?
Lots of syllables, yes.
And so he has, in his work, does a lot of comparison and research across the country and internationally, and was the perfect person to do some homework for us on this topic. So he is going to present to us what he has learned about how East Greenwich stacks up, both within the state and also kind of what, comparatively, kind of out of state, how people look at performance.
All right, thank you. As a socially awkward, minimally competent public speaker, just warning you ahead of time that my typical approach is to avoid contact at all possible costs and to barrel ahead as fast as I can. So I am strongly encouraging anybody, I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you, to interrupt, ask questions, make comments, throw up some what the whats, and feel free to interrupt, because otherwise I promise you I am going to go a mile a minute.
Now I feel bad.
So the reason why I'm doing this, I sort of do some of this stuff for a living. The National Center on Education and the Economy has been doing education benchmarking for the last quarter century or so. And benchmarking is fairly new to the education field, but it's been around in industry and economies for 100 years. And the way it works in industry typically is some company or some field takes a lead. And companies that have fallen behind want to figure out what do they do to get into the lead, and what do they need to do, not just to catch up and equal them, but how do you leap ahead of your competition? And it sounds strange that we would talk about education in terms of competition, but as you're going to see from some of what I'm going to be showing you, and some of what we're going to be discussing, there is a competition aspect to it, because in the end there are reputational or data-driven issues that will actually drive whether our students get into what college or university. It's going to drive where students wind up ending up in the workforce and what they wind up doing. And we do need to be mindful of it. And if we don't want to be mindful of it, we do so at certain peril. And so I will kind of throw some comparisons of East Greenwich, mainly focused on the high school, because quite honestly, most of the data that is used comparatively is done at the high school level, but not exclusively, but mostly, as you'll see. And we'll try to compare East Greenwich to other high schools and districts within Rhode Island, but then also try to look, how do we stack up nationally? And then beyond that, what can we say about what we're learning about what other leading education systems around the world are doing? And so we'll try to draw some lessons learned from that. I will say this is going to be an exercise in frustration because there are no clear-cut standards of comparison necessarily. What you will find is that different entities have their own reasons and their own metrics by which they make certain judgments, and they don't necessarily make sense, as you will see, and some of them are totally inconsistent, even looking at the same data. And so this may be informative, but I suspect it's also going to be frustrating at some certain levels. So at this point, the data that we have about how our students are performing in our schools is still based on the NECAP assessment system because we haven't gotten anything back from the PARCC tests, which have now replaced NECAPs, right? And so we're sort of a year behind. And even these, this is just sort of a snapshot because this is only 1 year. And obviously, there's not trends here. It's just trying to give us a sense of point in time. You may wonder why these high schools, and these are all high schools, are ordered the way they are. One of the big things that everybody looks at are the rankings that are put out by Rhode Island Monthly, which what Rhode Island Monthly has in terms of educational expertise, your guess is as good as mine, but it's something that everybody looks at, right? And so it's something that people talk about. It's the way that people organize their thoughts. And so this is how Rhode Island Monthly ranked the top high schools in East Greenwich. And so they started with Barrington, and East Greenwich, I guess, in the last one, came in 6th, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But if you look at the data, East Greenwich actually stacks up really, really well, right? At least in the last year. But I don't think that last year's NECAPs were particularly different from some of the previous years. You'll see, other than Barrington, our math scores were among the top in the state. Reading scores, it's very, very, 95% versus 100 or 98. I tried to include the state ranges for all of the high schools, where I was able to pull it down. And again, you'll see that we're well above the state average in all of these areas, reading, writing, and math. SATs, had our kids, the high school kids do on the SATs, we had the highest math SATs in the state, right? Well above the national average, well above the state average. We were well above the national average, well above the state average in SAT reading, and then also SAT writing. So again, among the best. It's all so far so good. So here are some of the traditional measures that form how people compare high schools and how they compare districts. And again, East Greenwich is kind of well within the range. We don't have the biggest student-to-teacher ratios. We don't have the lowest. We're not way off the scale either way in terms of per pupil spending. Graduation rates, they're excellent, right? So far, so good. Another thing that gets factored in, and this is a theme we're going to come back to a few times, what are the high school students doing with AP exams? Because that is sort of a proxy for college readiness, and it's something that a lot of high school students will wind up doing. And again, you try to compare it, Barrington's a much bigger high school than we are, and so you kind of look at different things. It's sort of the number of students who are taking it. We had more kids, our kids took more on average than any of these top high schools in the state.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
Because I have a little bit interpretation here. The first is Barrington is 1.5 times bigger than East Greenwich High School, but their AP participation rate, which matches like a U.S. News data, College Board data, they're double than us. That's why U.S. News give Barrington and Classical much higher rating because their participation rate is much higher, right? So the issue here I see is we have a higher per number of students taking the, if you look at the average, we're much higher, but we have much lower percentage of the students taking the course. So really, it's matched what the parents' observation is. East Greenwich School District is relying on that little percentage of the top students to contribute to it, but it's, the vast majority, they're not participating. Either there's an issue with the high school not offering the opportunity to them, or there's an issue pre-high school, they're not prepared well. So I don't know what the issue is, but that's my interpretation on that data.
We're gonna come back to you. He was educated in China, and you're gonna see when I get to the international piece,
Yeah.
China is really, they're knocking it out of the ballpark. So he's about 12 or 13 slides ahead of us. But we're gonna get there, right? Because I'm actually gonna come back to that, and I'm gonna come back to the US News World data. And I think that's gonna inform kind of the discussion that happens afterwards. You know, what do we want to measure, right? Now, the Rhode Island Department of Education has its own classification system. And those of you who are on the ad hoc committee who heard me talk about this when we had our meeting, there are some crazy dark arts that go into their system. And so, Lori, jump in at any point, but I cannot begin to unravel how they come up with their scores. But our Rhode Island Department of Education has its own classification system for schools. And again, they kind of put everybody into buckets, you know, commended schools, leading schools, typical schools, and the like. East Greenwich High School was a commended school, right? We did very, very well. So we had 2 commended schools, right? The high school and Cole. Mrs. Meyer, excellent. Eldridge was in the next classification, leading schools, excellent. Typical, so the Fredstown, Meadowbrook, and Hannaford were there. And again, it's very consistent with all the top performing districts, right? We're pretty much the same as Barrington. They had 2 commended schools, we had 2 commended schools. We had 1 in the leading category, and then we had the rest were in typical, but none of them in any of the lower categories, right? And so, again, we stack up very favorably, at least according to the metrics that the Rhode Island Department of Education uses. And again, if you want to try to unravel that, knock
I'm
yourself
going to
out.
hold off for a bit. They're changing again, just FYI, so.
Oh, great.
And so how they classify it, here's your top scoring schools by the Rhode Island Department of Education. Nowhere in here is Barrington. Like Barrington is on the top of every list, and Barrington isn't here. You know, again, go figure. And we're all looking at basically the same data. So yet a different way to rank. One test that is given that is sort of consistent across the country, and it's a sampling. Not every student in every school takes it. There's samples that are done in schools in every state, is the NAEP exam, the National Assessment of Education Progress. And so you'll often see stuff calling it the nation's report card. You'll see news articles when they come out with their new scores. And again, this is just another way, another assessment system that's used to try to get some sense comparatively. You know, how does state stack up one versus the other? How do high schools stack up one versus the other? Although I haven't been able to find whether we've had kids in the NAEP sample or not, and so it doesn't really stack up in terms of like an East Greenwich High School or East Greenwich School District kind of thing, at least the data that I've seen. But this is out there, right? And this is another way to look at it. And I wanted to include some of this data just to give you a sense of how Rhode Island is stacking up versus the rest of New England, and then also versus the rest of the United States. And so here, the picture's a little bit different. Rhode Island is kind of in the middle in terms of performance at a national level, but we're slightly behind the rest of the New England states, which we'll get to. So this is just the first 2 columns over there, 4th grade math. The middle ones are 8th grade math. We didn't have kids, I guess, take the 12th grade math exam in the last go around. But Rhode Island kind of is in the middle of performance on the NAEP exams. And then here's how we stack up versus the New England states. And so we're kind of trailing, not by much in some instances, but a little bit behind some of the other New England states, at least on this one particular assessment. And again, now this is reading, right? 4th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade, which we don't have. Rhode Island, again, sort of right at the national average, kind of right in the middle. 8th grade, reading scores versus New England. And again, we're kind of trailing, not by a whole lot, but in most instances we are. All right, now we're going to get to US News World Report. And again, this is sort of a recent thing. They're obviously better known for their college ranking systems, which everybody pays attention to, whether we want to or not. they have been ranking roughly the top 6,500 high schools. I keep saying prior methodologies, and I say it in the past tense because in 2 weeks they're going to unveil the 2015 next series of rankings, and apparently they're changing their methodology. And so I don't know what that's going to look like, and I don't know how that's going to factor into how everybody comes out. So the top 500 high schools are their, what they would call the gold medal winners. And then there's like 2,000 high schools that get silver medals, and then roughly 4,000 high schools that get bronze medals. So this is the last one. And again, this is how they ranked. Again, this is just U.S. News World Report's approach. They had the top 5 Rhode Island high schools: Barrington, Classical, North Kingstown, Lincoln, and Middletown, which sounds kind of similar to some of the previous rankings that we saw. All of these had bronze, and then East Greenwich was kind of in the rest of the pack. Now, there's great variability because I think in the year before that, my recollection was East Greenwich was a bronze medal, right? Bronze or silver?
I thought there was a technical issue why East Greenwich wasn't even ranked, and I might be mixing it up with another ranking. There was something having to do
There's a
with.
technical reason for why you can't get a medal,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
And it-
so that's what it was. There was a
Yes.
technical reason why we couldn't get a
Yes,
medal.
but I mean, it's technical and it's not technical. I mean, it's important as well, and, right? And I believe it has to do with
No child
the number of
behind.
low,
No child left behind.
of special, but is it special population?
Not special, the economic disadvantaged students.
Yes.
You know, so that's consistent with the Rhode Island Department of Education, which gave our East Greenwich High School the warning status.
Right. It has to
Which
do with
the
the
U-
gaps that you have among economically disadvantaged students, correct?
You have to have a certain passing rate.
Yes.
You know, that's what they looking. And because we didn't, we are, does not meet the no child left behind requirement. That's why, that's the first line, cut-off line for the U.S. News. If you does not meet that requirement, you don't advance to the second round. To
It's
be
a
ranked.
threshold rather than a technicality, I would say.
Threshold in terms of what?
Threshold in terms of
It's like a
X
first
number
date.
of kids of that
If
population
you don't
have
have
to
the
pass, and if you
subgroup.
don't have that, you don't even get to
You
be
don't even get to
considered
play
for.
in, right.
So it could be, yes, but for this, you would have received this color medal,
Yeah.
but since you didn't, we can't even weigh those other
Right.
things.
Correct.
We don't have
Did
enough
it also
kids
have
in-
something to do with the population?
sizes.
That we
Yes.
had so
It's-
few
it's so
students that they have some kind of a mechanism for?
Lori's point's well taken. We were at the highest point, if you remember what I sent out to the community and the public, we were at the highest point, but we didn't have enough numbers to trigger us over to get into that category.
I actually called the U.S. News. They sent me the link which Dr. McCreary sent out later, which is the same explanation. Pretty much they're saying, because I asked them, say, why last year, East Greenwich High School was within 1,000, but now it's completely out. They explained to me why. I have a friend there, so.
Oh, that's good to know.
I called them after Suzanne called them, I did.
We're expecting a much higher ranking on May. Not that we're holding you accountable, but it will be all your fault.
You can't hold me accountable for what I'm saying.
So I'm still unclear. Is it that we didn't have enough of this population, or that our achievement is too poor with that population?
Achievement is too poor
Okay,
with that
thank you.
population, which is the same measurement the U.S. News, the Rhode Island Department of Education is doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, actually, the Rhode Island Department of Education is creating combined groups so that you actually do have, you're able to measure those disadvantaged groups. I don't even like to use that, but that would